Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to barrel my way through. I'll barrel my way through the selected high points, if not memories, until I come to about 10 minutes before the hour ends, and then I'll talk about now. But that's how it'll. So I've had a few interesting collaborations with God, some of which I wasn't even really aware of as collaborations. But start at the beginning. I was born in Seattle in September 1943. My father's name was Frank Martin and my mother's was Catherine. A year after I was born, our family moved to New York City. My father, who had studied and written about meteorology while he was at grad school at the University of Chicago, getting his PhD, he was hired as the chief meteorologist at Northwest Orient Airlines. So from Seattle we moved to New York so he could assume that position. And we lived there, and that's when my mind started actually waking up and thinking and remembering. So I cognitively began my life in New York City, and then we moved when I was 4 out to Long Island. So I got a chance to play in the Long Island Sound and go to the beach at Hempstead. I might say that when we were living in New York, an older woman came to live with us. I took it that she was some kind of caregiver while my mother was taking care of more recent births. And I'll have more to say about her. She, in effect, was the first adult that I was able to spend a lot of time with and who made an extraordinary influence on me. I'll tell you a little more about my parents and their backgrounds later. My childhood was such that we moved across the country when my father took a job at Annapolis. We were there 1 year and then moved across the country to Monterey, California, where the Navy, the Annapolis Academy, had bought a hotel and was in the process of refixing it or turning it into a school. My first year there, we lived on the campus, which was a hotel. We had our own rooms in the hotel. I had an immense amount of freedom. Too much. And I may reflect on that later if there's time. So my father he was one of 3 people, 4 or 5, 6 people who came out from Annapolis, all scientists, to do math and physics and teaching of Navy officers. When I was 8, my dad, in his spare time, if he had any, was building a house up on the hill overlooking everything. And I remember that we didn't feel like we had any money. I know we must have, but I didn't get an allowance. And there were things I wanted and I wasn't sure how I was going to get them. I finally got a paper route when I was, I think, 9. And did that for a number of years through junior high. And we with my first few bucks, I went to Charmack and Chandler and bought a hardball. I was into baseball. We had no TV, but there were versions of radio that would carry these games, and I would listen to them as if they were happening, which they weren't. They were replays. And so I bought a hardball, and I was now in the 8th grade. And a group of friends and I were playing with my brand new hardball. And somebody hit it over the fence and it bounded down the hill. The school was on a slope. And I said, let's all go look for it. And we did. We all looked for it, except some people had a shorter time span than others. And I found myself down there looking everywhere, under trees, under everything. And I couldn't find it. And now I'm the only one. And so I mention this because it was my first prayer. I was 13, and I prayed, God, I didn't even know what that word would sound like coming out of my mouth. God, I need to find my hardball. So I'm not really asking for anything, it's stating something quite clearly. And I said, now how's this going to work? And I thought, well, there's a bird that's singing in this tree over here. And I walked to the base of the tree. Why not? And though I had been to that very spot looking for the ball, I now saw the ball. And so maybe miracle number one was, the takeaway was I felt heard. I felt heard. Another memory, when I was later that year, approaching my 14th birthday, I went to a camp my mother thought I would like, called Mount Hermon. Turns out it was a Christian camp. Surprise. And there's a place we were sent sometimes in the morning with our Bibles, and we would sit in a place where we could focus on what we were reading. And I'd never really read anything in the Bible, so it was all strange. But I sat in this very meditative place that I found, where the east branch of the Zayante Creek and the west branch came together. And on top, there was a waterfall that was coming from a little runlet up on the hill. So you had three places where the water would meet. And I just found it transforming just to sit there, gaze at words that meant nothing to me, and essentially say, I need you. I had a few bad habits by then, things that could have put me, in juvenile home. And I needed help. So since the baseball incident, now came the camp at Mount Hermon, where all week people talked about Jesus and God and the mission field or whatever. But on the last night, I recall having spent some time in that sacred spot I told you about, where everything came together. I prayed that Jesus would find a way to come inside me. When I was in high school, I started reading the Bible. I started going to a church Mayflower Congregational Church in Pacific Grove. And I understood as I was reading that the point was to all this, that everything in the Bible happened the way it says it happened. Someone gave me, my freshman year of high school, gave me what they called a 49er kit. That's appropriate for California. And there was 49 verses. And the encouragement was to memorize one a day for 49 days. And I was probably pretty successful at it. Such as, trust in the Lord and do good. These verses were in there. And so shall you dwell in the land. Delight thyself also in the Lord, and he will give thee the desires of thine heart. Commit thy way unto the Lord, and he will bring it to pass. So you can see that some memory work was setting the stage for what I would need to grow into if I could. After high school, I decided to go to a Christian college. And it was Wheaton College. And I chose it because, frankly, I didn't trust my ability to be a Christian if I didn't go to the Christian college. Sometimes you know yourself too well, too early. So at Wheaton, I had a harder time with the idea of the Bible, everything in the Bible happening the way it said it happened. I really began to grow into literary understandings of the books I was reading, believe it or not, at Wheaton. And I understood that it was full of different archetypal and literary genres. And so I began to read it differently than the folks there were reading it. And I didn't know what to do with that. I can look back on it now and understand some things. Graduated from Wheaton with a degree in math, minor in music. Started working for a company in Chicago called Johnson & Johnson. And then I left because I wanted to be near a woman I would marry, whose name was Nancy. Ended up working for Lockheed and realized that what I was doing with my math was designing vectors and doing vector analysis of rockets and moving ballistics. And I thought, I don't think this is what you're supposed to be doing. And I said, well, how do I get out of this? I'm going to be drafted. So I don't sure what the quirk was, but I took a day off and drove up to San Francisco and filled out the paperwork and enlisted in the Navy. That was in August of '67. In October of '67, I went to, guess I would call it Officer Candidate Boot Camp in Newport, Rhode Island. And it was a long ways away. And it was cold. Did I say it was cold? The wind off the Narragansett would just grab your hat, your new Navy hat, and you'd end up running down the road after your hat. Too much. So I trained to be someone who would dive and work on ordnance, meaning it was called explosive ordnance disposal. And I don't know what possessed me to do that, except the swimming in the ocean part. And I, to this day, can't imagine why I made that decision. If Lockheed wasn't who I was, walking down a hill to an unexploded object was definitely not who I was. When people say thank you for your service, I silently think, I'd rather you say thank you for being alive. I wanted to read you something that I wrote when I was hearkening back to about when I was 9. Remember, I said we lived on a hill, and so it was a tough place to play catch. And if you missed the ball, you might have half a block to run to find it. So 10 years ago, I wrote this piece. It's called Catch. It's about my father and I. I liked it when it was his idea, not mine, though it was way too often mine. We would grab our gloves and go down to the street for a catch. These were old gloves, mine from several Christmases back, with no rawhide lace along the top, like the ones Honus Wagner and the rookie, Pee Wee Reese, used in their games of catch. I would feel that my father and I were talking in the playing of catch, but no words were spoken. Except the occasional, oops, sorry, or just sorry. There were times when I would miss and run after it as it bounded down the road past the debris of previous mistakes and dropped balls. And there were also times when every throw was guided and blessed, every catch a fop, made whole by its own perfect sound. It was then that we were friends each of us were daily longing to find, throughout that endless decade of my growing bones and our mounting solitude. I would always miss, as I still do today, the strange intimacy of catch in those fleeting years when he had it to offer. So, do you see now why, dearest soul, I might wake up after all these years with the aching in my heart for a game of catch? Not with him, not just with anyone, but with you. With you. With you. The ball moving like grace between our bare hands, a soft rhythm like the one my father and I were always hoping to find. Fop. Fop. Back and forth, back and forth. Drowsy imaginings, easy ideas, here on the couch. Lobbed gently and caught, perhaps even dropped but soon picked up and returned in this warm early breaking of the sun's new day. While I was in the Navy, it was a 9-month training session in Alabama and on the Potomac. Alabama because it was called Hazardous Duty School. And we learned about all the kinds of weapons that people would use with gas in them. Bad gas, nerve gas, mustard gas. So that was shocking to me. And then the other 6 months was up in Indian Head, Maryland, where we had to dive a lot, but it was in the Potomac, which literally had no visibility in it. So we were having to work with our hands on things in the Potomac and just have to do it by feel. The school was difficult. 6 weeks of it were spent behind a double fence where we were exposed to the knowledge and the fundamentals of nuclear devices. After school was out, I was sent over to Pearl Harbor to be trained in yet more EOD stuff and go out on ships, have a day or two. And on such a trip, I actually was on a dive, and finishing the dive, I passed out. I didn't know why, I didn't know how. Of course I was out. But when I woke up, I just didn't understand how that could have happened. I didn't come up too fast. I went on the dive with 3 other people. We did the same dive. So whether I knew why or not, I needed rehab to get better. I just worked with a neurologist for 3 months, Army neurologist at Tripler, and had to just rehab, learn how to walk again. I was walking by getting to my feet somehow and standing up and walking behind my wheelchair. And I did a lot of laps around that hospital in my wheelchair. And I was sewing things out of leather just to get my hands to work again. But having done all that rehab, I was determined to stay in the Navy, even though they gave me an opportunity to decide not to. I thought, it makes no sense for me to have all this training and not do something with it. So my first tour was on an ammunition ship that went up and down what was called Yankee Station, and in the bay, Cam Ranh Bay and Da Nang. Had a lot of what we call unreps, which means other ships would come alongside and send a line over, and then I had to be there watching to make sure nothing went wrong on deck. After that, I was on the USS Kitty Hawk, the first carrier I had ever set foot on. It's still in Bremerton, in mothballs. So there were other things and times I had to literally perform what was called an RSP, Rendering Safe Procedure. And that could involve anything from tying a line around an item and driving a Jeep far enough to get it away from what it better not blow up with, or even more tricky things. So sometime in there, during my time in the Navy, I remember going home for a brief visit with my parents. We were looking through some odds and ends, and I saw a picture of my father, and I looked at the back of it, and it said, "To Catherine with love, from Morris." I didn't know from Morris. His name was Frank. So I thought I raised an important and logical question with my mother. What's with this? So she sheepishly talked about the fact that when they were married, my father was encouraged to change his name from Morris Bloom to Frank Martin. And I found that out while I was in the Navy. I tried to talk about this new discovery with my parents, but they just sort of downplayed it. Earlier, I remember, I think in my earlier years in the 4th grade or so, we had to do a family tree. And I was trying to get information about my father from my mother. She said all the records have been lost. I didn't know anything about records. I figured people would just remember stuff. So I had this grazing uncertainty about my family tree and couldn't get any answers. When I got out of the Navy, I had been reading books about education. Books like Summerhill, a great book called Education and Ecstasy, and another great book called The Way It's Supposed to Be. Some of you may have seen those titles. So I got a job as a teacher. I got my 5th year in and taught in Marina, California for 1 year, opportunity class, small classes of people who didn't want to be there. And then I got curious about moving to the East Coast. Hard to stay in one place after you've been in the Navy. So we moved to New Hampshire, and I taught 3 years in an open school in Rochester, New Hampshire. And about that time, I started going to a church in New Hampshire, in Durham, New Hampshire, by the university. And it was UCC. I didn't even know what UCC stood for. The church I had gone to, called Mayflower, never changed to the UCC, and I didn't know they didn't have anything to change to. So I began reading the Bible again, 32 years of age. And I think as Borg said, began reading the Bible again as if for the first time. As if it weren't all a single book, but composed of many literary forms and types, each with a different voice, each with a different style, each with a different meaning, message. A year after I began that revisitation to the Bible, I felt urged, maybe called, to look into going to seminary and doing something actual with my life. And the closest seminary was Boston University School of Theology, which it's possible to get through without actually having to say the word God. It's very academic. But I loved it. I loved everything about it. I knew nothing of church history, had amazing lectures on church history. Had very fine scholars, including one who had written an important book that I found instrumental in my life called An Introduction to the New Testament by Howard Key. He was my professor. While we were living in Boston, I now was the father of 3, 2 girls and a boy. Something happened in Boston, I'll quickly relate, changed my life. We lived in an old Victorian You could buy those for about $30,000 in the ghetto. They're worth a lot more than that. It's a beautiful old Victorian. And it had 3 stories and a full basement. And on the 3rd story, which is where, in its earlier days, in the turn of the century, the hired help lived. But that was 70 years prior to this, and there were about 6 layers of linoleum on the floor, on the 3rd floor. And I thought, I've got to get this linoleum out of here. And it wasn't that easy. I found it just stymieing. You have this little spatula thing, and the pieces would come up in massive sizes like this. This is going to take me forever. With the 3 kids, I wouldn't get started on that job until maybe 9:30, and worked till 11:30, 12. And it took probably, I think, 3 weeks. And I finally had it, though with a lot of scratches, the way I really, 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 really wanted it to look. No linoleum. I varathaned it twice. And it's Friday night, and it's probably 9 o'clock. And we have this group of Christian people that live in the house, along with us. And I walked down to let everybody know I had finished. I said, hey, guess what? I finished the 3rd floor. And the response was thunderous. Okay, that must feel good. And I thought, ooh. So I walked back upstairs to the 3rd floor, and I'm looking at this beautiful floor, shining. And I said, oh my God, I just finished all this work, and no one cares. And I've heard in what is the most audible, inaudible voice, I like it. I thought, and I was quiet, and the voice said, I would understand if that isn't good enough for you. I know you like people to see things. And it really got to me. What a clever voice. What an extraordinary, clever response. No one even knows it. No one cares. And I love the subtlety of the response. I like it. Pause. I would understand if that's not good enough. And I thought, my God, what can be better? And with that moment in my life, I realized I didn't have to do something in order for people to like it and tell me about it. For the first time, that doing something well and having God know it is the greatest reward at all possible. And so occasionally I slip, but generally I'm not fishing for compliments because it's not the point. So, take a break for a second. Not a very long second. Any thoughts? Your own? About you? Should I call on someone? Please, Bill.
I found your talk quite interesting because went slowly, and it was very personal. And there are many parallels, by coincidence, with my own life, with a father who once said to my brother when he was interviewing my father because he was studying anthropology, my father was talking about his own childhood, and he said, you know, I don't remember any conversations with either of my parents that involved more than 6 words.
Yeah.
And my father wasn't much of a talker either, or a listener. And I think I needed that and didn't know that I needed it. And but that was interesting. Another coincidence is that the town I grew up in was within bicycle distance of Wheaton College and the city of Wheaton, which is right next to ours. So I'm familiar with that town. So for those reasons, I find your talk quite interesting.
Well, Wheaton has sometimes been called the college that's 25 miles away from sin. Because that was where Chicago was. Obviously, there was plenty of sin in Chicago. So, after seminary, I was in Sacramento for a very short time at a church there, and then received a call to a church in Spokane, my first solo church. And one evening, probably 6:37, my wife and kids were at Chuck E. Cheese, and I was sitting alone with a tablet, waiting to get some ideas for my sermon tomorrow. And one of those voices happened again. And this was so strange. My parents had just been to visit. I'm in my 30s now. Had just been to visit, and they had shared with me a picture of my grandfather and grandmother that I had never seen. And he looked just like me. Like me when I was in my Navy uniform, looking like him. And I thought, this is the guy. I don't know very much about this guy, but I want to know more. So my parents gave me the picture. I looked at it a number of different times over the next few weeks, and now I'm outdoors with my pen and pencil. My pencil and paper, going to write a sermon, and this voice comes again and says, I just thought it would be nice to thank you. Try to get used to that. So I had some training in working with clients while I was in seminary, working with people who were from Boston State Hospital, a mental hospital. And so we learned about how to try to keep a conversation going and not say the wrong thing that will stop the conversation. And I thought, I got to keep this going. I don't know who this is. So I said, well, how does that, thank me for what? The voice was, thank you for doing something I was never able to do. Those were the words. And I said, what's that? And the answer was, loving your father. And I thought, well, how does that help you wherever you are? And then I realized it was the voice was that which belonged to my grandfather. And he simply wanted me to know that it was valuable to him, that I was loving the man he never quite learned how to love. I think I said something like, well, it isn't always easy. And then I thought, so how does this affect you? Explain why it matters since you're not alive. And this is quite accurate, what I remember. And of course, it's all going inside me, so you sort of have to take my word for it. But he said, well, you know where it says that the sins of the fathers will be visited upon the children and grandchildren? I said, hey, I've been to seminary. Yeah, so what does that mean? And he said, well, the reverse is also true. What is that? The faith, the trust, the love of the third and the fourth generations will be revisited upon the fathers. And it struck me, almost struck me down, how much sense that made. Because time doesn't only move one way with God. So things travel this way until they need to move back and forth, kind of like catch, where you do your life as if you can help your ancestors. You can straighten out some of the messes in the ancestry. I thought, that's going to affect the way I live the rest of my life. While you're busy doing what you're doing, the effect of that leads into the future, but it also leads back to the past. And things can get fixed inside you, but more so, maybe in the great expanse of the world. So much of what I have done since that exchange has had to do with trying to search out the mitzvot, the good deeds that one can do upon waking or later upon being, and it finds its way up into the firmament and goes backwards and forwards. So that was probably the most profound experience of all these that I had ever had. Now a little bit, well, let me just close by saying that I retired in 2011 from the ministry, having taken a church in my own hometown to finish out my career. Go figure. And when I retired to Eugene, I didn't know what I was going to do with myself. I had no idea. Didn't know anybody except for my son Jake and my daughter Erin, who lived here, and I thought that's where I better move to. In any event, by the end of that year, maybe 8 months after I'd gotten here, I attended a meeting that dealt with the breakup of Occupy Eugene. It was a year after, but there were a few people wanting to build something where people could live. So I joined them, and that became Opportunity Village. And I was really, really fixed on what I needed to do from now on. I had read a book called The Politics of Jesus, in which the author, by way of a Huguenot minister who hid 3,000 Jews in the Huguenot mountains, I had read that book, and it just made me feel as though every year is the Jubilee year. Every day is the Jubilee year. And Jesus, I felt, said as much in Nazareth, where he felt that, he read the scripture and then he said, this is how I'm going to live my life. That's my translation. This is how I'm going to live my life. And I thought, I'm going to have to live my life like that. As if every day is a Jubilee day. And as if somebody in your life gets to have something that you have too much of. So for the past 10 years now, since Opportunity Village and Nightingale and myriad other efforts to appear before political leaders and ask them to look at things a different way, I'm on the path I need to be on, and I don't need anybody like in Boston with the floor. I don't need anybody to tell me it looks good.